The sovereign citizen's story begins with the apocalypse, but one unlike in other stories because the fact of the apocalypse fades to irrelevance as the story progresses. In its place is the totality of loss, where so much absence becomes a presence in itself. I chose to write a post apocalypse story so I could focus on the small details of how someone faces such unimaginable loss as the character did. The five-part story eventually becomes a more straightforward science fiction story that involves a civilization based on machine intelligence and how that defines humanity. But the first part, Solitude, is about a single human navigating life in a civilization completely unchanged from before, except that there are no other survivors. I mentioned in my last video that the inspiration for this was my own horror of thinking about how I'd live if something happened to my family. I basically always concluded that I'd become a recluse, completely disinterested by other people. I felt like since the pain would be so much, no one could offer me any solace, which meant everyone, everywhere, would in a way also be lost. Who knows if that idea would ever happen, but it stuck. So what happened in the story? What was the trauma? I already described an apocalypse, but this one was simply a mass disappearance. It's been done before, least of all in the Book of Revelations, so I needed something more traumatic than just this. I looked to the ordinary for a solution. An ordinary married couple finding time for one another on an ordinary night that led to intimacy. That was the moment I chose for everyone to disappear. An instance so ordinary that it was almost an operation of muscle memory, so that when the character's wife disappeared midstream, the disappearance would at once be known and unmistakable. I did this because I needed to make the disbelief in the event that much more unreasonable and desperate. Disappearance of a loved one is a never-ending trauma where survivors lack the ability to properly grieve. Doubt is violence for a surviving family member. I needed this story to move past this quickly, so I did not want doubt and disbelief to consume the story. I needed a clean trauma. And for whom did I present this? I chose a middle-aged man who suffered from manic depression and had previous addictions. A kind of classic character for literature, but he is no misanthrope at first. This came later, and for good reason. He was a well-educated, affluent, moderately skilled, and very empathetic person. He was clumsy and prone to overthinking things, but his manic depression meant he oscillated between bouts of incredible energy and debilitating lethargy. He met the events and managed to face the slow decay of everything around him, though not without many negative coping mechanisms like a relapse and self-harm. But he pulled through, and the story becomes one of simple survival for himself and the many animals he rescued along the way. I'll dig into these later, but right now I'm focused on the fact that this process of survival had to be layered in order to be believable. I didn't write a character with survivalist skills or one who happened into good fortune in the form of some secret government facility. My survivor was ordinary and had to shed his civilized habits bit by bit as the situation required when various portions of the city no longer functioned as well as we all would have expected. There was the molded produce in the groceries, refrigeration that gave out, electricity and water that cut just ahead of winter, and even dogs who were also in their own process of shedding their domestication to become feral and hungry. The Sovereign Citizen series about the step-by-step process in all this. You might wonder where the science fictionness fits in. For me, I'm a fan of the Decayed Empire subgenre, where high technology is coated in dust and retrofitted for some new purpose. I love that. But usually those stories accelerate right through the day-to-day life to focus on some sexy drama. I don't love that. That gets boring really fast. So I wrote a very slow story that embellishes all of those things that I love. Just trust me that it leads into traditional science fiction later. Without much in the nature of a spoiler, I can say that there will be AI, lots of it, later. In fact, that was what convinced me to write the slow story. AI is at a point where we are now rightfully questioning images and text, whether it is real or artificial. For me, a story about AI lands right in the middle of that, raising questions about how it was written. I felt the best way to show it was a human story would be to elevate all the human details that a machine trained on story architecture would overlook. This is where my character's attribute of empathy really plays out. I use that to build the story by letting him notice small, non-obvious details that are pregnant with meaning, the sort of details everyone will notice and then immediately ignore. I would. But without any humans left, all these suddenly had meaning that wouldn't be there otherwise. The story is a slow meditation on his surroundings as the character changes imperceptibly through each phase. That's life. When we all lose our jobs to machines, it is our capacity to notice these details, to be human, that will set us apart and signal any new art forms. Our technical capacities for abstraction and high art are going to become irrelevant. What we need is more humanness in our art. And that's what solitude is all about. The trauma of facing these small details while finding a way to survive as a human.